Well, thank you. It's great to be here with some of my colleagues from the legislature. It's good for us to get together in the fall from time to time. When you think of Mike Farnworth and Jenny Kwan and Joe Trasolini, who are here, all born outside of this country and have come to this country and contributed so much. My colleague Rob Fleming, our environment critic, and Margaret McDermott, who's someone obviously with whom I have some disagreements on policy issues, but who I hold in very high regard and who's recently taken on the job of Minister of Health. And I think everybody in British Columbia wishes her well with that challenge. It's kind of great to be here at the Vancouver Board of Trade, at a Vancouver Board of Trade event sponsored by labor unions. But the reality is, and the Council of Carpenters, and Wayne has spoken to this as well, that relationship is regular. Ken's company has a very strong relationship with labor unions. They work together in this city on support of the United Way all the time. But it is a reflection, perhaps, of a topsy-turvy time. I mean, I'm here, leader of the NDP, speaking to you about the value and importance of the market economy and free enterprise. And members of the 1% are angrily walking picket lines, at least the 1% who work for Gary Bettman. As Wayne mentioned, my mom and dad ran a business in this city for 42 years. My dad worked in the industry he worked in for more than 60 years. They retired last Thanksgiving respectively at the age of 81 and the age of 75. It was a small business. Every year at the annual general meeting, they'd trade the jobs of president and vice president. My brother, who is a successful entrepreneur also in Vancouver, I'm very proud of him. He competes with businesses around the world and wins. He described my parents' business as a social enterprise. And it's true what they did in their lives in the community. And the reason I think they stayed in business so very long was that the people that they worked with, the people that they served, their clients, were also their family. They pushed service beyond the level that one would normally do so. And I meet people in Vancouver every week who come up to me and say, boy, we miss them. We miss working with them over the last year. And I think that view is reflected here at the Board of Trade as well, and the work that you've done in the last year on workplace mental health. I think it's groundbreaking work. I think it's important work for change, and it reflects what businesses all over British Columbia, all over Canada, and business organizations do in their community. But the Board of Trade here, I think, has done something special in Vancouver. I read on their website that they are concerned with some of the inadequacies of the market system and believe in publicly funded social services and health services and education services. And it reminds us that when people talk about the differences in BC politics, about the polarization in BC politics, we forget sometimes the extraordinary degree of consensus on important political issues that we have in our province. One of the things I've tried to do as leader of the NDP, however imperfectly, is change the way we engage in politics as a political party. Now, this has challenges, because my Liberal friends have run 7 or 8 or 9 negative ad campaigns against me personally. And I'm hopeful that by February or March next year, they'll run out of double entendres and ways to rhyme with my last name. And that might stop. So in those moments, you feel challenged in that regard. But let's start with this point, something maybe we can all agree on, that Premier Clark and Mr. Cummins and Ms. Stirk are all fine people. They're in politics for the right reasons. They're committed, they're thoughtful, they're intelligent. We disagree on things. Some of those disagreements are as long as my arm. But their contribution is worthy of respect. And surely in the political process, with the issues facing our province together, we can do better than run people down personally. I am not going to do it as leader of the NDP, but I have selfish reasons. In the last election, 1.7 million people didn't vote, and that affects the consensus we need to deal with the economic issues of our time. People have been opting out of the political system, at times disgusted with the way the political system itself functions. And that's a major problem for our society because we require a degree of consent on all sides to be successful and to make our society work well. The second reason I think it's a major problem, the negativity of our politics, is that most of the problems facing us, take the issue that's so central to the debate here in Vancouver, the issue of housing, require all levels of government and the nonprofit sector and builders and real estate people and everyone to come together. And the toxicity of the debate makes that more difficult at times. And thirdly, I think we are losing the serious debate we need to have about serious issues. In the 10 years the NDP was in power in the 1990s, 129,000 more people came to BC than left BC from other provinces. Since the Liberal Party has been in power, 59,000 more people have come to BC than left from BC for other provinces. Both of those reflect the good record overall of our economy of attracting people from other jurisdictions. Now, in the last 5 quarters, coinciding with the tenure of the present Premier, we've lost people, right? As we have at different times in the past, because our economy goes up and down, and that reflects things. Now, we're having a debate right now, and in a lot of the Liberal ads, they attack us for saying people leave the province. But surely we should focus on the reasons why, and not a discussion of blame, given the fact that the facts do not support a view that people left en masse in the 1990s. And the facts do not support a view that the Premier is to blame for the fact that the last 5 quarters haven't been very good. I think we're failing to have a serious debate about issues in what has become increasingly a discussion and a debate about name-calling. So what kind of government, as we try and present ourselves as an alternative government in the next election, do we want to be? I think we want to be a government that focuses on the fundamentals, focuses on the key things that government does to support the society and support the economy. That we want to be a government that understands the limitations of modern government. And we should understand what some of those are. Currently, and you've seen it from the 2009 fiscal year, 10 fiscal year to the 10-11 fiscal year, and then from the 10-11 to the 11-12 fiscal year, the contractual obligations of the provincial government go from $54 billion, that's billion with a B, to $80 billion in the first of those 2 years, and from $80 billion to $96 billion in the second of those 2 years. Commitments made by the current government that future governments will have to pay. They are contractual obligations, but they limit the scope of future government action. The government today is making decisions for future governments. Not just in terms of debt, but in terms of contractual obligations. Secondly, and this is true since the NDP last came to power, we have trade deals that are important for our economy and that are a reality and also limit the scope of government. We have NAFTA and the Softwood Lumber Agreement, amongst others. The latter agreement excludes many of the policies that governments of all political stripes engaged in from 1871 to 2003. That's a real and fundamental limitation. Thirdly, we have the limitation of the federal government, which has made its own choices, including in the year between 2013 and 14, freezing the Canada Health Transfer, which has been increasing over the last 10 years by roughly 6%. That places challenges on the system and limitations on future governments because new social programs require a willing partner in Ottawa, and Mr. Harper has a different view of those issues. And you can't behave here in British Columbia as if that doesn't exist. And I think, finally, most significantly, we have to build on where we are now. And we have to acknowledge that while the Liberal Party has been in office for 11 years, everything they've done hasn't been bad. They've done, in fact, over that period, good things and, in my view, bad things. And so I have no intention, and I think it would be a waste of time we waste too often in British Columbia, to return to a previous era. We've got to build on where we are now. And I think this has happened in a positive sense in the past. Everyone will recall the central question for the economy of BC, of Aboriginal relations, of First Nations rights, of treaty settlement, and so on, that the Premier, Mr. Campbell, the previous Premier, had initially opposed treaty settlements. And then he showed the leadership. He learned and he changed and he signed the Tsawwassen Treaty and other treaties that have surely contributed to the debate, and we have to continue to build on that ourselves. We can't simply throw out what's been achieved. And finally, we have to learn. We have to learn from the mistakes of the current government, of course, but from mistakes that governments have taken in the past. I think one of the fundamental mistakes that the NDP government did in the 1990s, for example, was not that they didn't do an extraordinary number of good things, but that they often did too many things. And the quality of the implementation suffered as a result. The first year they were elected, they passed 92 bills. The next year they were elected, they passed 74 bills, and so on. And regardless of the quality of those bills, and since they were NDP bills, presumably they were all good bills, regardless of that, the capacity of government and the capacity of business and the community to sustain that change and to withstand all of the implications of that change made the changes less effective than they should be. So I think what we have to do today is focus on a few things and do them well. A few things that are very important and do them well. And that's what we intend to do as a government. Now, BC has tremendous advantages. There's enormous reason to be optimistic for the future. We've had sustained periods of growth over governments for many years, and our quality of life, by any standard, by any world standard, is excellent. Our connection to the Pacific Rim, something we have to develop and sustain and nurture together, gives us an advantage in difficult times when many potential trading partners are having financial and economic difficulties. So we have advantages. But we've got some problems that we need to address, and we need to address them together. Firstly, we have a productivity problem in Canada and in British Columbia. We are not as productive as we need to be. In fact, British Columbia has dropped to the bottom half of provinces in terms of productivity. Some of that has happened in the last 10 years. And Canada has dropped in terms of productivity amongst nations. And this, in the long run, creates dangers for our economy. We are not making enough things. Secondly, we're seeing a dramatic growth in something that I think is problematic for the whole economy, a dramatic growth of inequality. BC, with all of its benefits, has the highest absolute levels of inequality in the country. The top 20% after taxes, after the progressive effect of the tax system, take home 44.5% in British Columbia, and the bottom 20%, and think of that, that is not a marginalized group, that is the final 800,000 people, the lowest people in British Columbia, take home 4%. And that ratio of top 20% to bottom 20% is the highest in the country. And that, I would argue, affects our long-term economic future as well as the quality of our community and the quality of our life, because we all know, all the evidence shows this, that higher rates of inequality are linked with many of the struggles in society, from alcoholism to mental health to high infant mortality and so on. So these are issues that we have to address as a society, it seems to me, and they're fundamental. And the third question, of course, and when you have timber supply areas in BC where 90% of the trees are dead as a result of the mountain pine beetle and other pests, that we have to address issues of sustainability and climate change together. And those are things that when I talk to people in my community, when I talk to young people in my community, are things that are a preoccupation of them every day. We have to act in a sustainable way, and we have to try and grow our economy in a way that is consistent with the beauty of our natural environment, which itself is an economic advantage for British Columbia. So what do we do? What should our focus be? Because the provincial government doesn't have every lever of opportunity, every lever of public policy making. We share those responsibilities with the federal government, and some we don't hold at all any longer. It seems to me, if we're addressing issues of productivity and inequality, our number one priority as a government, and it will be our number one priority as a government, is to address issues of education and skills training. If the current government rightly says 80% of jobs of the future require post-secondary education, and they're all the best jobs, and we are not meeting that level of training now, we have to address that. That's something in provincial jurisdiction we have to do, and that's something we have to work with the people in this room, business and labor and others, to get done over the next period. And it doesn't matter where I go. This is a uniting idea. It's certainly uniting for young people who frequently are barred from post-secondary education or training because of costs today to them, or who get locked in to education's decisions because they are so heavily invested in them and so heavily in debt. It's of concern to their parents and grandparents who worry about their future and about the pressure on the middle class. It's of concern to business leaders like Don Lindsay of Tech, who has to replace 50% of his employees in the next few years. It's of concern with the forest industry, which has seen compression over the last 10 years, losing 35,000 workers, but who now have to replace many workers and build for the future. It's of concern for everyone, and surely it's an issue we can all rally around and get behind, we can all make a priority of. And it is a difference in substance between myself and the NDP and the current government. The only ministry, and this was after a Drummond report in Ontario that said the only ministry you shouldn't cut is post-secondary and skilled training. The only ministry that received a cut in nominal terms in the last budget was the ministry responsible for skills training and post-secondary education. Those programs, they were all cut. It's the wrong direction for our province. We need to, A, build ladders of opportunity and allow young people, particularly those who are not of means, to have access to post-secondary education. And that's why I proposed reinstating non-refundable needs-based student grants in British Columbia to allow people to climb those ladders of opportunity. And I've said how I'm going to pay for it, and this is more challenging in this room, which is to reinstate the minimum tax on the banks that was taken away in 2008. Say what you're going to do, say how you're going to pay for it. And on the apprenticeship and trade side, surely this can be something we work on together. We need to increase the number of participants. We need to improve completion rates, which currently are at a sorry 37%. We have people at BCIT and at Selkirk College training on equipment from the 1960s and the 1970s, not ready to take on positions with employers, and sometimes seeing the training they've worked so hard to get be discounted in the marketplace. We have to ensure that everybody is involved and that government takes its responsibility, its fair share of responsibility on government projects to make sure that there are apprentices and training opportunities for young people, for women, for First Nations people. This is the priority for our economy. It allows people to reach the middle class who wouldn't otherwise reach the middle class. It allows people hope for the future, and it fills a major problem for business today. It will be our priority. It will be how our government is judged, how we address that problem if we are lucky enough to be voted as government in the next election. What else do we have to do? Well, surely in British Columbia we have to take care of the land in provincial jurisdiction. And we haven't been doing this well enough. We went through a process. My Liberal colleague, John Rustad, recently chaired a committee, and NDP colleagues Norm MacDonald and Harry Baines and Bill Routley were on that committee, chaired a committee to deal with some of the issues around Birds Lake and the timber supply issues in the interior in general. And what they found was there was no inventory. If you think of the decades prior to 2002, the Minister of Forest and the Premier and everyone else would know the state of the forest in British Columbia, and that was cut out so that we were making some of the most important decisions in the forest sector blind. There was a cabinet submission in April, and this is, I think, shows some of the positive change that's happened in the province, which argued for the elimination of environmental standards and was opposed by the forest industry as being short-sighted and throwing away all the work they've done to build the environmental reputation of the ministry, of the industry. So we need to invest in what government's responsibility is. We've cut silviculture, we've cut our knowledge and our information about the industry, and we haven't supported skills training. And surely those are the things we have to do. And then we can stand up and work with the industry. Work with the industry to reduce the number and the amount of raw log exports. And here's a good place to start in that. In 1906, before any of the current political parties were around, the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia saw fit to apply a surplus test to the export of raw logs. It said they could only be exported if there was surplus of domestic demand. In January of this past year, the Minister of Forest overturned the advice of his own committee and exported raw logs 90 times. It doesn't make sense to abandon our manufacturing base for 1 or 2 good years. So a good place to start, working together with the forest industry, is to apply the present standards and ensure that there are job opportunities in manufacturing and forestry in British Columbia well into the future. There are, of course, other industries that are growing. And I think that all of us in politics, and all of us as a society have to do what we can to ensure that investment comes to our province. One of the challenges we face, I think, is that sometimes our actions have unintended consequences. The present government has at times, and you can hear it in their discussion more sometimes than in the substance of what they do, has argued against government and its action, and has cut public servants in areas that are essential for economic development. So that the waiting time in the mining sector for permits was 55 days in 2006 and went up to twice that by 2011. Right now it's 37% higher than it was in 2006, the wait times for permitting. I think we need to have high standards, but I think we have to have confident public servants who can come to decisions on those issues, yes and no decisions on it. And I think we have to have enough public servants to make sure that the regulatory process is not this kind of impediment to economic development. Which brings me, just en passant, to Enbridge. It's an important debate for our province, and people know what my position is. But I think it's important to understand why we're taking these positions and what we think should happen. In 2010, and I think the government was wrong to do this because I think it's important in these times to take responsibility. The government signed an equivalency agreement that essentially said that the Prime Minister and the federal government's regulatory decision would be British Columbia's decision. I clearly don't agree with that. It wasn't a joint review process that would go back to both jurisdictions. It handed over jurisdiction to the federal government. And this leaves us, frankly, with very few options. My view is that it would have been dramatically preferable to have a true joint review process between the federal and provincial governments, but that didn't happen. And so I've recommended, in that case, that we reject the equivalency agreement, that we give 30 days notice to the equivalency agreement, and we have a process here in British Columbia. We have to have a process in British Columbia. Enbridge is allowed to apply. They're allowed to apply here in British Columbia. And in the absence of an environmental assessment process, we would be saying they didn't. So I think that that is the mature approach of someone who has the views I do on Enbridge, which are that it's not in our economic or environmental interest. And you can contrast that with the view of the current government. And can you imagine an NDP leader or an NDP politician saying, you as a company can get your environmental approval. You can get your environmental approval in the current process, and then we will, if we feel like it, harass you on permitting. You imagine the implications that would have for investment. That is the position of the government of British Columbia. I think it's more important to tell people what you're going to do consistent with the laws of the country, and so that they can make their judgments and plans accordingly. And finally, the issue of sustainability, and I want to leave time for questions. I tend to go on, you know. My colleagues are the people in the room who are nodding their heads right now. But just to say this about the sustainability of our environment and its centrality to our life here in British Columbia. We have a situation, because we're in Vancouver, where we have a body, TransLink, which has no capacity to implement its own plans. The announcement of new plans without financing are inevitably followed by the rejection of those plans for lack of money. And I think that we have to have a more frank debate about these issues. One of the problems in politics today is a disconnect between the taxes people pay and the services they get. Frequently people think, for example, and sometimes politicians bring this onto themselves, that all the taxes people pay go to paying MLAs or something like that. But we clearly have a disconnect with that, and the carbon tax was an example of that disconnect. All of the money from the carbon tax went to subsidize other tax cuts. And the result is some of the people who pay the highest carbon tax, people who can't afford to live near where they work, are paying more and seeing no benefit from that. So I've said, clearly, we need to roll back some of the tax cuts from the carbon tax. That the corporate income tax cut from the carbon tax that went back into from 2008 to 2012 should be rolled back to 2008 levels, keeping corporate taxes that were in place between tax cuts in place between 2000 and 2008. The 37% tax cut to the corporation income tax that occurred in that time, so that we had some capacity to deal with these issues of transit and infrastructure in our society, that we could move people and goods and services more, and that people could live the quality of life that we will expect and need to have in Vancouver in the coming decades. It's not easy to say that we're going to raise taxes, but I would make one point. Since we showed leadership on that question, the Minister of Finance has said he's going to raise corporate taxes by 1 point, from 10 to 11%. Yesterday, a largely business panel on the HST, PST, said that they would consider raising corporate taxes by 0.5%, and that the federal government is reducing those corporate taxes by 2 points. So this is a reality of the times. And I think it is essential, particularly in the wake of what happened to the HST, that people know where we stand on taxation issues before the election. So that means no capital tax. That means you will know what the corporate income tax is for the full 4 years. That means you will know before people go to the polls exactly the implications of that, and government will then have the responsibility to manage within those limitations. I think that's the right approach. That's the right response to public's genuine frustration and anger over what happened with respect to the HST. These are challenging times for me. I'm humbled by this very big crowd. I came down on the SkyTrain today, went off without incident. Ian supported me with a well done there. Someone said to me, boy, when's the election? You're going to be premier. You know, the NDP's won 3 out of the last 21 elections. Better record than the Canucks, especially when they're locked out. But what it tells us is that the election ultimately will be close, but that our responsibility is real. Another young man on SkyTrain a few months ago, hearing impaired young man, came up to me, he tapped me on the shoulder, he asked to write me a note. So I handed him my notebook, and he said, "Are you going to win the election?" I said, "You know, if we work hard, we might be able to do that." He said, "You have to win. No pressure." I think these are important times, and I think that we have to try, as leaders in the community, to raise our sights a little bit, politics. People are doing that out there every day. Gladstone Secondary School has a robotics program that they founded a few years ago. An inspired teacher founded the program. They just won first place in the Robotics World Championship and second place of all the countries in the world and all the hundreds of teams participating. Gladstone won. My trip to the Northwest on the Enbridge pipeline, I met a young man named Doug Niesloss, who started a small business at 17 guiding people to see the Spirit Bear. He now has a lodge 10 years later and has been named chief and elected chief of the Kitasoo Hei. I live in a community and represent a community in Vancouver, Kingsway, that is 83% visible minority. where people have come from all over the world and we work together on amazing projects every day. There's so much to be optimistic about in BC. We are open to investment. We are open to immigration. We've built a society we can all be proud of. Not NDPers proud of, but NDPers and Liberals and Conservatives and Greens and Independents. And I think in this period there's a huge responsibility for all of us to not call each other names, but to have an informed debate about the real choices facing the province. And in doing so, inspire more people to be involved in the political process and advancing the economic interests of everybody. Thank you for having me today. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dix. Mr. Dix has agreed to take a few questions, so please write them on the blue cards and pass them up. Our staff will pick them up from you if you hold them in the air. I had told him I was going to ask a question about corporate tax, but I've changed my mind.
Oh,
so
bait and switch.
The bait and switch.
Switch,
but I suspect
like
there may be one coming. So our Canada's 4 Western premiers have been trying to convince Ottawa to adopt an open skies approach to encourage more carriers, particularly Asian carriers, to serve the Vancouver Gateway. The efforts have met with little success. What would you do differently to make the case for open skies?
I'd say this, that we benefit enormously from the variety of traffic we get through the airport, and we have to do what we can to promote that. I think in fairness to the Prime Minister, I think he supports that too, but that there are real challenges and real limitations, including our own limitations. We want our domestic carriers to be able to serve Terrace and Prince George and Kelowna and Campbell River and Comox. Right? So these are real challenges that we face to our domestic providers. But principally, the problem is one of reciprocity in other jurisdictions. So I think we have to continue to put the pressure on and work together to do this. But to acknowledge, in fact, in this case, that the Prime Minister is, I think, doing his best. Not that he is failing us, but that this is a difficult task and that we have to continue to work together to achieve our joint goals.
There are a lot of questions. If your government has already made up its mind about the Northern Gateway project, what is the purpose of subjecting Enbridge to another review panel?
Well, it's, you know, I think I was in Hartley Bay, and I think somebody there had the same question for the Prime Minister. The reality is that we're in an equivalency agreement. So the specious thing to do would be to not get out of the equivalency agreement, to oppose Enbridge Northern Gateway in words, but not in substance. And in my view, the equivalency agreement is not good for British Columbia, that the Prime Minister should not be making those decisions in provincial jurisdiction, and I do not agree with the position of our provincial government. I don't agree with the position that we can somehow, after we've granted our environmental approval to the process, use permitting, and by the way, the courts don't agree with it either. So I think that absolutely, if we are out of the equivalency agreement, Enbridge and other companies have the right to apply, as does Kinder Morgan for their pipeline. And we would go through a legitimate environmental assessment process here. But to say that companies do not have the right to apply in British Columbia, you're giving them no option to seek an environmental approval of their project, is not a realistic position. And that's why we've taken the position we have.
So here's a small one. We are all aware of the struggles.
Well, he's writing on the back there.
I'm not. We are all aware of the struggles to deliver health care in the current fiscal environment and the need for health care reform. What are your top priorities for health care reform? How would you pay for these?
Margaret, do you want to take this one? I know you do. I know you do.
I think that we've been in a period in healthcare in British Columbia that's been, I think we'd all acknowledge, a disappointing period, in the sense that in the 1990s, driven by federal cuts to healthcare that were used to essentially address the deficit problem in Ottawa, but essentially just transferred that deficit problem to the provinces, we actually engaged in a series of initiatives that were very effective in the healthcare system. We launched the Therapeutics Initiative, which ensured that we had independent information about the value of prescription drugs and helped us keep the cost of prescription drugs down, such that our costs here in British Columbia are less than in any other jurisdiction in the country. And in prescription drugs, we also at the time engaged in things such as reference-based pricing, which were controversial and opposed at the time, but have been continued by the current government because they made public policy sense. I think what it tells us, these times tell us, is that we have to be determined to do what I think Margaret, one of the things Margaret would say if she was here, and I say, which is to invest in prevention and primary care. I have type 1 diabetes, and I get scolded for this, but I don't have a family doctor. Right? And the truth is that the help that I might need as someone with type 1 diabetes, and I manage my type 1 diabetes very well, and I have a good job, and I have other advantages that make it easier, and people who support me in that. But the kind of programs and supports I would need to address my type 1 diabetes so I didn't have a serious acute care health issue are the very programs we haven't been able to sustain because of the pressures of acute care. So we've got to focus, it seems to me, our incremental expenditures. In the debate over the last 10 years, a lot of it has been about acute care, and a lot of it has been about long-term care, on prevention and on community care. So support for home support as a priority, I think. Support for primary care, using our health professionals better. The current government, for example, has advanced the use of nurse practitioners in a way that I support. I wish they do more, but in a way that I support, ensuring that the people we spend a lot of money to train are able to use the full extent of their skills. And finally, deal with some cost questions as well, so we have the money to do that, including continuing to address the issue of costs of prescription drugs. And we've put forward a specific and detailed plan, which I will not talk about now, because I think we're getting to the end of the question. So we've got to take actions to ensure the system is efficient, one, and then we have to take actions. And so if we're going to invest in new things that will make and ensure that health of British Columbians is improved, then we have to find that money through those efficiencies primarily. One thing I'd say finally is that, in Canada, there is a debate amongst the provinces about who does the best job. Let's consider this, and let's leave you with this idea on healthcare. Province of Alberta spends 11% more per person on healthcare than we do, and has worse outcomes. Overall, if you add the public and private sector, they spend 17% more per person than we do, and have worse outcomes. If we had to match their level of spending in healthcare, we would have to raise the PST by 2 points to pay for it. Our health professionals, our doctors, our nurses, our healthcare workers in the field do a job we should be proud of. And our public healthcare system has responded to difficult times, often in, I think, thoughtful ways. And so I think we have to acknowledge where we're succeeding as well as where the challenges are.
We've probably got time for one more. So would you support creation of a single police force in the Lower Mainland to remove administrative impediments in the pursuit of public safety?
In the abstract, it seems like a good idea. But I do think that administrative change, dramatic administrative change, often has costs that far outweigh the potential benefits you see. Some people in the province would argue there should be 7 health authorities and not 5. The cost of going to that would be, I think, take us away from the core goals we need in healthcare. And equally, the cost of dramatically changing our policing system. And I think we're making some changes within homicide and other areas of policing. The cost of a massive organizational change to our policing system would be such that I think it might be better to focus on what we have now and make it better. And that's what I think the best course is to do.
Okay, I'm going to slip in one more.
Oh,
there has,
I should have talked longer on that one.
Short answer.
Who is my favorite expo?
This one didn't actually sign their name, so I probably shouldn't ask you, but I'm going to anyway.
Oh, wow.
There has been some speculation on whether or not the NDP would bring in a capital tax. Can you clarify your position?
You know, I get accused often of giving extremely long answers. Answers that are sometimes longer than my speech. So to this, I'm going to say the answer is no.
So I got time for one more. Adrian, on behalf of the Board of Trade, I want to do two things. First of all, I want to thank you for being here. Secondly, I want to, from a personal point of view, not necessarily on behalf of the Board of Trade, but I think probably on behalf of the Board of Trade, thank you. We look forward to a debate of the issues and not the name-calling and that part of politics, which I don't think most of us are particularly interested in. So we would like to invite you, along with the other leaders, to have a debate at the Vancouver Board of Trade early in the new year.
Sounds fantastic.
Thanks for being here.